For all of this presentation, I'm going to be talking about a historical treatment called physician-assisted paroxysms and the consequent sexual relations that probably resulted from some of the thinking at the time about female sexuality. The whole issue began from hysteria as a concept, and this webpage here will give a lot more, and I'll link to it in the video shortly. The key issue in this whole video is that physician-assisted paroxysms was really about masturbation of women back around the 1800s to 1900s, and at the time it was based on an idea that women who suffered with hysteria should be treated by manually masturbating them. It was called pelvic massage at the time and various other things, but in reality it was clitoral massage and massage around that area. Now, if this sounds shocking to those who don't know about it, I can't do anything about that. These are historical facts. Now, if it strikes you as shocking, then do listen on and do click the link to this article, which is pretty long, on my blog. How I came across this topic was that I was looking at some strange medical treatments in history and then came across this issue about physician-assisted paroxysms or pelvic massage. Now, I have no issue at all with current day pelvic massage of any type, and anything anybody wants to consent to, that's their business. I have nothing to do with current day concepts about massage at all. This is about what went on in history, and that's where the exploration will be. I scroll down the page to really talk to some of the issues that are in here, and people can pause the video or visit the blog link and read more about it, but please don't get distracted by all the text. The key issue is that hysteria at the time was a catch-all diagnosis for a range of symptoms that couldn't be explained by any other medical condition. And those symptoms included anything from anxiety, irritability, fainting, to nervousness, sexual desire, and even a tendency to cause trouble. How interesting. And women suffering from hysteria would often be described as displaying a tendency towards irrational behavior, emotional excess, and self-indulgence. Now, all that was from a time around the Victorian era. So the concepts of medicine, treatment, disease, symptoms, and so on were pretty rudimentary. And mental health treatment was not really a science or subject to a science around that time. It was a very different culture. So modern day psychiatry took off somewhere in 1808. This sort of issue was really in its infancy, the business about hysteria. But psychiatry, even though it was coined as a new medical discipline in 1808, was very slow to develop and adopt scientific principles. So much of this stuff lasted through the infancy of psychiatry. In this historical timeline, of physician-assisted paroxysms, what happened was that it did not involve only manual massage of the pelvis or clitoris as it was. They used things like water and douches and so on to induce orgasms. But the main part of the treatment was about massage manually. Now, around that time, there was high demand for this treatment, and the clinicians of that time made quite a living from all of this. And women frequently reported extreme relief from hysteria, as it was conceptualized, after the treatment, and they returned for repeat treatments. That's not surprising. If they got some relief, it's like getting relief from pain, and they would have also conceptualized it as hysteria. So the clinicians were getting pretty worn out by this high demand. Though they were making money, they had to protect themselves from what was called chronic hand fatigue. So that led to the invention of the first medical vibrators, known as the manipulator. And down here is a photo of it. I'm waving the mouse around here. Now, that was the first vibrator, one of the first ones, and apparently it was steam driven or something in those days. And then afterwards came battery powered devices, and it evolved into current day vibrators. But around that time, this was big business. The customers felt better for it. The clinicians of the time felt that they were achieving something because their patients were improving and coming back for more treatment. But hysteria in itself was not a syndrome or an illness or disorder that was well defined, because look here, I'm highlighting that, where it says it could be almost anything, including irrational behavior, emotional excess, and self-indulgence. So if after having a few orgasms they felt relief from whatever this hysteria covered, then they would want more and think that the treatment was effective. So this lack of understanding about these the female body and psychology, the whole of a lack of female understanding of female sexuality, led to these kinds of treatments, and it got perpetuated by a whole system, a pretty powerful system. In those days, the doctors were very powerful. They medicalized the whole thing. They had their own beliefs, and they were very powerful. They couldn't be challenged by patients. They had to submit, and those who submitted, a fair percentage of them felt better, so that was good enough for them. Okay, so economic factors also came into the equation, and then they invented the more modern devices, and those made it easier. Women at the time had very different rights from today. They were very limited and were treated as objects and were thought not really to have any sexuality at all. I think I duplicated this point here, but that's no bad thing. I'll correct that later. But there was a prevailing belief um, that women did not experience sexual desire or pleasure. How could that be? I don't know how to understand that, and I don't think I want to. Um, so there was no kind of oversight or regulation about this sort of thing back then, and there were no clear ethical guidelines or oversights by bodies to monitor the behavior of physicians like we have today. Now, I went on to close this article on the situation with Carl Jung, where I deviated up here. Now, there was never any evidence, hard evidence, that Carl Jung was involved in this paroxysmal assisted, this physician assisted paroxysms, this kind of masturbation. But it appeared from a lot of historical documents, letters and diaries and perspectives of other people that he did have some sort of sexual relations with his patients. He was a married man who eventually had 5 children from that marriage, and those intimate relations carried on through the marriage. That's not great by modern standards, and Jung himself felt torn about that. Now, the question people will obviously be asking was, did he have sexual relations? And how is that connected to any part of this topic if he didn't carry out this manual masturbation? Well, the culture at the time was very loose, and this idea of hysteria that Jung diagnosed in his patient was the thing that led to some sort of sexual intimacy. And the numerous diaries that have and other letters that have emerged in the last 20 years gave a perception that he was quite sexually loose. Then when you think about the wider culture of people around those times, it was not for them, they never wrote in the kind of pornographic detail that we might expect today in modern erotica material. So we are unlikely to find that evidence by today's standards to say, yes, he had sex, or yes, he did this, or he did that. It's not likely that we will find that evidence as we want it today. But there were other issues as well. There was a spread of issues that Jung had engaged in some kind of sexual activity. So the physician-assisted paroxysms was a sexual activity. They didn't see it as sexual back then, but we know it was. And I think they had an idea that it was. And then some of the people around that time engaged in sexual intercourse with their patients. And Jung got caught up in all of this, though it seemed that he was careful not to leave any specific evidence. And my overall view, having weighed up all the probabilities, was that he did have intimate sexual relations with one or more of his patients whilst he was married. Now, the relevance of all this is to what is happening today, and I want to leave aside my confusion in all this, because I did admire the work of Jung and I incorporated it into my practice, but I don't want to focus on that. It was still good material, but I was left in a state of confusion when I came across all this stuff about Jung. The thing I want to focus on was the symptom improvement thing, because the women who were subject to this physician-assisted paroxysms, as I call it, felt symptom improvement, which they attributed to this weird concept of hysteria. So whatever emotional relief they got, they felt right, it was working. And here is the key point. We're making that same error today in mental health practice, where physicians or psychiatrists have a belief, and belief is an important thing, that if they try this medication, it might work. Is there the science behind that medication? Are they aware of it? Are they careful in their diagnoses to make sure that they're matching the treatment to the diagnostic condition? And if there is relief, is it really hitting the spot? Because there are medications that can give relief to mental health symptoms, but not actually address the issue. So for example, like with depression, people with depression suffer with poor sleep, anxiety, low mood, etc. If you give them something like lorazepam, they will sleep and they'll be very, very thankful, and their anxiety will be cut significantly, and they might think, well, this medication is working for me, although I'm a bit sad, I'm better for having some sleep and this anxiety being reduced, so I would want more of that, is what they would say. But that is not treating the illness, and this is why the treatment really has to be carefully matched to the diagnostic condition. And that's why in this world where there are no x-rays into the mind, the clinician has to be very, very careful to find evidence that meets the diagnostic criteria. Otherwise, we're going to be repeating, and I think this is happening, what went on to perpetuate the masturbation business that went on in the 18 to 1900s. So I'll leave links in the video below, and for people to go and read up more carefully about this. I will correct parts of this blog as I go along, but do check on Google and continue to read on this. But it's not just about the topic, it's about what it means, in today's world, whether the same mistakes are being made or similar mistakes are being made. Thank you for watching.